Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Politics here at The Hindu with me, Nistula Hebbar, where we unpack the news making the headlines in domestic politics. I'm back after a restful leave, and while I was away, there has been much in terms of domestic politics and developments related to it that have happened, like the controversy over the Gyanvapi Mosque, the survey that was done, and the legal case that is now proceeding with regard to the Gyanvapi Mosque. Other than that, the Congress had a big Chintan Shivir or an introspection camp to sort out its own internal organizational and electoral issues. And the BJP, the Congress's Chintan Shivir was in Udaipur and again in Jaipur, which is again in Rajasthan. The BJP held a big meeting of its office bearers and kind of tried to find a way forward in terms of organizational tightening, which has been a little bit let loose because of COVID-19 and the curbing of political activity, etc., etc. But these are not the things that I'm going to be looking into for this episode of Talking Politics. Instead, this is also the week where Prime Minister Narendra Modi completes 8 years at the helm of affairs at the center. His victory in 2014 was a big one and portended many new things for Indian politics. This will not be a very crisp sort of episode of Talking Politics with regard to one particular subject, but it will be a bit of a meandering sketch of what I think are the three biggest changes that Prime Minister Narendra Modi ushered into not just his own party, the BJP, but also Indian politics, something that has led to the opposition hitting the road, planning yatras, going back to the people to kind of come up with ideas on how to challenge the domination of the BJP. The Modi phenomena, and I use that word very responsibly here, uh, first came to the centre's attention, to the national attention, in the spectacular victory that the BJP registered in the 2014 general elections. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi was elected to that position in May 2014, it was with a full majority, a departure from the coalition era of the last 3 decades. Not known then, but realized later, it was the end of a particular kind of politics and the beginning of another. What are the three big changes Prime Minister Modi brought about in Indian politics? Apart from, of course, astounding results, things that we thought would never happen in Indian politics, what are the changes that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, being at the helm of affairs, has made to Indian politics? I'm not even talking about governance here. I'm only talking about electoral victories, how to get them, and hegemony. Well, the first, as I said, it was the end of coalitions at the center. This was a 3 decade long trend, which the 2014 victory of the BJP ensured. They got more than 272. I think they got 282 seats in that first round. And even without NDA allies, they could have formed the government, but they kept their NDA allies with them in that term at least. And this end of the coalition style of politics was rung a fragile yet tensile politics of electoral alliances, of complementarity of interests, agreements, consensus approach, and multiple centers of power ended in May 2014. Well, his majority in the 2019 general elections was even bigger than the one in 2014 and has established this end of coalitions not as a one-off development but something that appears coterminous with Mr. Modi's tenure, at least, that as long as Mr. Modi is going to be leading the BJP, this seems to be a settled trend. What is the second change that was brought about by this? The electoral dominance of the BJP. Now, that has been a phenomena that has currently set off a lot of literature, a lot of academic discussion. A lot of people have a lot of theories about what has happened. Here is what I know. Well, this electoral dominance has been characterized by the breaking of many hoary chestnuts related to the BJP, namely that it was an upper caste, upper class party that was socially conservative, hence it could not attract the vote of the young and women, and that mobilization of caste groups or mandal mats was the kryptonite that would render what many political scientists called the Hindu vote divided and ineffective. All of these things was reversed under Prime Minister Modi. As per the results of the 2019 general elections, the BJP has the largest number of OBC, scheduled tribe, scheduled caste members of parliament. So they have 113 out of a 303 figure. They have 113 other backward class MPs, 43 scheduled tribe MPs, 53 scheduled caste members of parliament in the current Lok Sabha. In other words, 37.2% of the BJP's Lok Sabha MPs were OBC, 14.1% were scheduled tribe, and 17.4% are scheduled caste. This means that 68.9%, let's kind of approximate it to 69%, 209 out of 303 Lok Sabha MPs elected in 2019 under a BJP ticket were non-upper caste and from castes that were traditionally considered lower down in the caste hierarchy. Now, for the past few elections, especially since the 2020 Bihar elections, where Prime Minister Modi spoke explicitly about the women's vote, he has been flagging women's vote. The BJP has also been flagging the need to woo the women's vote. Statistics since 1996, I'm quoting from a Lokniti survey on this. 1996 has shown that nationally it was the Congress that had an advantage with regard to the women's vote, but that advantage does not seem to exist anymore. The BJP, through assiduous wooing of the women's vote via schemes like the Ujjwala Yojana, which is basically cooking gas, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which has been really actually quite effective in terms of wooing the women's vote because it's a permanent asset for the poor in rural areas. This has managed to win a significant portion of the women's vote at a historically opportune time. As for the first time since independence, women in the 2019 general elections voted in equal number as men. They had been lagging behind for many years since 1952, and it was only in 2019 that men and women came out in equal numbers to vote. And in the case of the last phase of the assembly polls in Bihar, which was in the Simanchal area in 2020, women outvoted men, which is why during the victory speech, after the results for the Bihar Assembly elections came out in 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi specifically mentioned women, Nari Shakti, and the support of women voters in getting this victory for the NDA alliance of the BJP and the Janata Dal United. Well, this also goes for the poor who, through targeted welfare schemes like free rations, pensions, tap drinking water, and housing schemes, no longer look at the BJP as an agro ka party. Agros means forward castes. This was demonstrated in great detail during the recently held Uttar Pradesh Assembly elections, where free rations, which the government had started under the Pradhan Mantri Anna Yojana, of free rations for them, supplemented by the state government also giving a kilo of salt, chana, and a liter of mustard oil free to the poor, was a big factor in the BJP getting a second successive win in Uttar Pradesh, which is unprecedented in the electoral history of that state. Now, this perception of backwards women and the poor cleaving to the BJP is, of course, aided by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's own caste identity of belonging to a backward community. That's the cherry on the cake. So, therefore, when he speaks about BJP being an open house for all communities, it rings a bell because he himself has come from a backward community and struggled his way to the top. So there are, of course, a universe of possibilities that that Prime Minister Modi encapsulates within his own person. Now, all of this leads to what I term as hegemony. With the busting of these electoral tropes in election after election, the ideological program of the Sangh Parivar, the RSS, and its associate organizations. Please remember the BJP is the political wing of the RSS, and all of them together, all the associated organizations VHP, Bajrang Dal, the BJP itself, and Sanskar Bharati, etc. All of them revolve around the main mothership, ideological mothership of the RSS, and collectively we refer to them for ease of writing as the Sangh Parivar. So the ideological program of the Sangh Parivar with these two big electoral victories has also got a fillip. Of the three core issues of the Parivar that the Vajpayee-led NDA government between 1998 and 2004 had to put in cold storage due to the exigencies of coalition dharma, the construction of a Ram temple in Ayodhya, the Uniform Civil Code, and the abrogation of Article 370 of the Constitution to have been pushed through by the Modi government. Of course, the construction of the Ram temple in Ayodhya was a Supreme Court verdict, but the BJP had provided its political heft to the movement for the construction of the Ram temple in Ayodhya. So these are ideological programs which were important for the Sangh Parivar, and these two full majority governments have meant that at least two of the three main core issues of the Sangh Parivar have been fulfilled. Being in government with such a majority also means that the large umbrella of state patronage, the power of the government to extend patronage in terms of institutional funding, appointments, etc. This has aided the flourishing of think tanks of thought leadership and institutional appointments of non-Congress, non-left, Sangh Parivar loyalist kind of people in government organizations. This was not heard of before. Even during Mr. Vajpayee's tenure, this was always mired in controversy, and there was a lot of pull push. This was done in the beginning of Mr. Modi's tenure, but now many of these appointments don't raise an eyebrow. It's just taken for granted that since a lot of these organizations have government patronage, etc., the government would like somebody from the ruling party's ideological stable to be appointed there. This is distinct from electoral dominance, but it is a consequence of electoral dominance. That is, electoral victories make it possible for your ideas to be institutionalized in the cultural and intellectual firmament of society through state patronage. State patronage is the big thing. Congress had access to distributing state patronage, and a lot of people say that the Congress ecosystem, ideological ecosystem, was built after independence, was largely supported through this. So, a dominance of ideology and its influence can be established through this route. So, these are the three consequences that I see of Prime Minister Narendra Modi uh, uh, being at the helm in 8 years, for 8 years, and I have elucidated them in a particular sequence because I believe that is the way that it actually flows. You have uh, an electoral victory, why this victory happened, and what are the consequences for it in terms of thought leadership and creating an ecosystem where ideology is perpetuated. And when ideology is perpetuated, it creates conditions for electoral victory again. Uh, as I said, one can argue that electoral victory is a result of ideological spread, but anybody can see that electoral victories need a host of other things, not least a charismatic leader at the top who encapsulates all these ideas and finds a way of establishing them. Thus, at 8 years, India's 7 year itch with regard to Mr. Modi seems to be done with. We are incontrovertibly in the era of Narendra Modi and the new BJP. The answers to how it can be reversed now no longer lie in the old coalition politics of sectional interests, but in new ideas of mobilization and intensive penetration of civil society. No wonder a lot of the opposition parties, including the principal opposition, Congress, has decided to go on a yatra called the Bharat Jodo Yatra, basically to go back to the people and get ideas on forging a new politics going ahead. So, uh, Prime Minister Modi seems to have established his own era and basically changed India's politics for a very, very long time to come. That's all I have for you this week. This has been a meandering sort of take, but I hope that it clarifies the big picture on what it means to have Prime Minister Modi at the helm for 8 years. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week.